the Wander and Reason Podcast. The crossroads of philosophy and practicality, where we explore such ideas with sincerity. And our intro music is as long as the intellectual dilemmas that we have debated eons upon eons in our heads. Welcome to episode 3 of the Wander and Reason Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Huva, and I'm happy to be back here for another episode. So, a lot of fun stuff to get to today, but first, if you like the podcast, if you like the blog, please check out our Facebook page. Updates are posted on there constantly. And also, if you don't mind, go over to Apple Podcasts, give us a nice little review, pass on some love. Definitely could use it. But this has been a lot of fun. So I'm enjoying creating this content for you guys. Anyway, so first things first, I do have a bit of an exciting announcement. So I know last week I said that the first time that we're going to have a guest is maybe a month or two out. Well, it's actually going to happen this weekend. So this weekend, one of my near and dear friends is going to be coming out here from California, and we're going to get into all sorts of fun stuff. So maybe coding, maybe what it's like to, kind of quit a job and go on this little bit of an adventure without a safety net or things lined up. So that should be pretty cool. So now, I'm sure all of you are wondering, on the edges of your seat, whatever happened with Zach's little experiment where he was not going to drink coffee for one day. And let me tell you, folks, it did not pan out that well. So if I'm going to be honest, I tried and I failed. So let me walk you through it, because I need to plead my case here. So I recorded that last episode, and I was like, all right, I promised this thing I was going to do. I was not going to drink coffee. Pretty easy task, right? No, yeah, just give up coffee. It really wasn't. So first day after the podcast, it was recorded on a Tuesday. Wednesday, I'm like, well, I can drink coffee because, I'll just not drink coffee on Thursday. Thursday, that was the day that I really made a concerted effort to not drink coffee in the early morning. I had a couple meetings, and so I went out to these meetings, met with some folks, was driving back towards the office, changed my route, and was like, you know what? I'm going to go to Starbucks because I'll just do it on Friday. So I went to Starbucks, and it's kind of funny. So I'm at Starbucks, and I pulled through the drive-thru. I don't like going in there. So I'm in the drive-thru, and it's a long line. But I'm like, whatever. I'm just killing time. Getting this long line. And I used to be a Dunkin' guy. Like, I used to be one of those people that was like, I will have a large coffee. And, like, ordered it like that, even if I was at Starbucks. I'm not that guy anymore. After moving out here to Arizona from East Coast, I have adopted the lingo, and I have a very bougie coffee order that I do. So, and I was like, some girl was like, hey, what can I take for your order? And I was like, I will have a hot, venti, triple mocha latte. And then I was adventurous, right? So I was like, and can I have a bacon Gouda sandwich too? And she's like, sure, no problem. Your total's 9 something. I was like, all right, cool. There's still like 5 cars ahead of me. So, the cars are moving. I don't know if I'm listening to a podcast or something. Turn it down when I get up to the window. Girl pokes her head out. She's like, hi. And I had my debit card already. I was like ready to go. Like, I'm always like prepared. I just want to speed in and out of that transaction, right? She's like, "Hi, the woman in front of you paid for your order, so you don't have to pay anything." And I was just like, "Whoa, like that's never happened." And there was definitely like a brief moment where I was like, I should probably pay for the order behind me, but I'm at Starbucks and that could be like $30. And and so I definitely owe a pay it forward. And I'll get to that maybe a little bit later because I want to do something creative for it. Anyway, the first thing she hands me is like that butcher paper that they put your sandwiches in at Starbucks because like they don't put it in like a bag. So she hands me this like paper thing. And I feel it, and it feels more mushy than I'm used to from my bacon Gouda sandwich because, I know what I'm getting, right? I've ordered this before. But I'm like, okay, whatever, put it down. She's like, and here's your grande mocha latte. And for those that you don't know, a grande is smaller than a venti. And there was that moment where I'm like, do I say something? Do I be like, hey, I really wanted a venti. But I was like, you know what? This woman paid. Okay, I'll just take the coffee, right? Yeah, thank you. Whatever. Pulled off. And I was driving back to the office after I picked that up. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, how funny would it be if, like, that woman, she goes up to the window and she wants to do the pay it forward thing. So she, like, looks at me in the rearview mirror, and maybe I look like a upstanding citizen that I am, right? Or maybe I just look like some poor hungry soul that like needs a free meal. So she's like, "Hey, what did he order? Because I think I might just pick up his bill." The woman was like, "Oh, he got a venti mocha latte. It's a triple, so there's an extra shot of espresso, and then you got the bacon Gouda sandwich. It was 9 something." And the woman was like, "Oh, well, can we make that a grande? And bacon Gouda is not that healthy. Could we instead, do you have anything wheat-based for the bread? And I'm thinking Canadian bacon and egg whites." And the woman at the counter must have been like, "Oh yeah, no worries. And your total's now 4 something." It definitely wouldn't be 4 something, but whatever. And an end of transaction, right? I don't know. But when I got back to the office, I opened up that butcher paper, and it was not the sandwich I expected. It was not very good. So it was a conundrum, right? It was a pay it forward. Someone did this random act of kindness to a total stranger. A little suspicious on the order. And I'm just kidding, honestly. I'm sure that woman said nothing of the sort, right? She just probably wanted to know how much it was and then paid for it in Starbucks. Maybe made a mistake. And so I thought that was funny. And I thought that was funny especially because I was like, mentally, I was like, I'm not going to get coffee today. I'm doing it. I'm not getting coffee. And I was like, I'm going to go to Starbucks. And then it was like, oh, your order's been paid for, like randomly by this act of kindness. I'm like, oh, wonderful. And then it's like not the order that I ordered. So it was almost like a little bit of like this karmic thing where it's like, oh yeah, you want your coffee, dude? Here you go. But at the same time, you really need to think about the choices you're making. Anyway, I definitely owe a pay it forward. So I was talking to one of my coworkers that kind of got inspired by this idea of picking up some gift cards and she said fast food places, which I think, if you pick the right one, it won't be that horrible. But maybe like buy a bunch of like $10 gift cards or whatever. And then just find some people that look like they really need it, especially here in Phoenix, you see that a lot of times and on the side of the road. And rather than, giving money, this way, a person can get a hot meal or a cold drink or whatever. So I think I'm going to do that. So that doesn't let me off the hook for Friday, though, last week. And every other day since then, I couldn't do it. Today is Tuesday again. And last night, Monday night, I get home from work And not a bad day at work, just a normal day at work. It was a Monday, but it wasn't like, I've got a case of the Mondays. It wasn't like that at all. It was just any other day. And get out of work, but I'm kind of tired, right? I just fell asleep around like 6:30, slept until like 10:30, woke up for a couple hours, went back to bed. But by the time I woke up this morning, Tuesday morning, I probably had like 10 hours of sleep the night before. I mean, it was phenomenal. So, anyway, I didn't really need a coffee, right? Well, at least that's what I thought. So I was at work. I get there. One of my coworkers already got there before me. She's already made a cup of coffee. And I come in, and I could smell it. And I'm just like, ooh. And I'm talking to her, and I'm like, yeah, I did this thing where I wasn't going to drink coffee, and yada, 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 but... And then she's like supportive, so she's like, you do you, you want coffee, you drink coffee. I'm like, you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. So I gave in again today. And I didn't want to just keep delaying recording another podcast till I finally fulfilled this obligation. So the new plan, and this is a cop-out. I 100% acknowledge this is a cop-out. But the new plan is to go a day without drinking coffee. But I think I'm going to do that over the weekend. Because for the time being, I am addicted. And I just don't think that I'm going to give up the habit. So there's that little explanation, update, what have you. I did feel the need to kind of come clean. So, other things. So, over the weekend, and it seems like a few movies out right now, like John Wick 3, that look pretty awesome. But I went and I saw Detective Pikachu. And that's Pokemon Detective Pikachu, right? It was great. And I wrote a blog post about this. So if you do read that, you might have already known what I'm about to say. But it was like surprisingly good. And Ryan Reynolds is the voice of Pikachu. So if you like Deadpool or just any of the older stuff Ryan Reynolds has ever done, he's really funny. And I'm not going to really talk about like the narrative arc of the show or the movie. It was one of those ones where you walk out of the theater at the end and you just feel good, right? And what I love about Pokemon is that for me, when I was like a little kid, by little I mean like whatever, 4th grade, something like that, 4th, 5th, 6th, around there, Pokemon was like the thing. And I collected a lot of Pokemon cards, and I had friends that did it, and we would trade them at school, and they were all like the original, the old school Pokemon cards, and not the stuff that they're making now, right? And so this movie like ignited this like Pokemon thing in me where I was just like, it was just this wave of nostalgia, and it really took me back. And so the next day I went to this cool record shop. They have like used books, and it's one of those places you go in and just everything kind of smells like incense, and then they're playing like some obscure cool song that's like kind of funky from like early 70s, and you're like, you don't even know who it is. And there's lots of like long-haired tattooed folks, and it's like a cool place, right? It's kind of it has like lots of like used CDs and Blu-ray, like old forms of like absorbing content that we don't do anymore, but they have all sorts of stuff in there. And I was kind of just like walking around. I was by myself, just walking around, kind of eyeballing. Like, I bet these guys have Pokemon cards. They had like Magic and all that other stuff. And I was like, I wonder what they have. So finally, I might have even Googled this too online. Like, do they have Pokemon cards? Instead of asking somebody, because that's how I am, right? So I was like, oh yeah, we have them at the trade-in desk. I think it said that online. So I walk up to this dude. I'm like, hey man, do you have any Pokemon cards? And he's like, Pokemon? Yeah. And he pulls out this binder. And I start flipping through it. And it's all like the best cards too, and all in this binder. They didn't save any of those like normal cards. So all these like, and a lot of them are newer, and they look really crazy. But then in between some of those, I'm finding like, oh crap, that's something I recognized when I was a kid. Oh, that's another one I recognize. That's from the base set. That's from Fossil. That's from Jungle. Like, I know all the lingo for these old cards. So I start pulling them out, like, excited, like, boom, 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 boom. Pull them all out. And then he's like, we have the rare ones in this case over here. And I'm like, ooh. So I like, walk over to this case. He comes around the front of the counter and has to like unlock the glass, because that's how serious this moment is. And I was like, oh my god, there it is. There is a base set Charizard, like the fancy, most desirable card when you were a kid, like the shiny holographic Charizard. It's $50. And it was funny is that in my head I'm like, oh, $50, that's a great price. Because it kind of is. Because that card used to be like $100, and then like the price lowered a little bit recently. So I was like, okay. And I started seeing some other ones, and I was like, screw it, going all out. Got that Charizard, got these other cards, happily checked out, and then going home and organizing all of these cards with like this collection that I still had. Oh, it was so great, because the point that I bring this up, and the reason I'm bringing it up twice, because I did bring it up in the blog. So check that blog post out. It's called "Gotta Catch 'Em All." It was fun to write. Anyway, the reason I bring it up is that I understand that it's like ironic and also maybe seems like a contradiction. The fact that here I am, gleefully purchasing just like bits of cardboard, these material things that they only have the value that we ascribe to them. They quite literally, like, to echo the words of last podcast, they quite literally would be like what Alan Watts describes as trash. Because they're just these things. And they're also things that don't even really do anything. Like, the whole point of having these things, once you get them, is to kind of put them away in your binder and, like, take them out once in a while and be like, ooh, like, look at that, it's shiny. Like, so the thing about this, though, that I think it's noteworthy of bringing it up, is that Pokemon cards, for me, and I think there's going to be like an equivalent for like a lot of different people. And maybe it's a generational thing. Like for me, at that moment in time, like Pokemon cards were the thing when I was a kid. And for other people, I don't know if it's like Polly Pocket or, Barbie or, G.I. Joe or whatever. For me, the cards are like this tangible, physical thing that is like a connection to my childhood. And it's this nostalgic thing. And like when you experience nostalgia, it's just this emotion that just makes you feel just at home, sometimes, right? At least in this instance, for me, that's how I felt. I was like, I guess the parallel I'm trying to draw is like when you were a kid. Think about like for when I was collecting those cards, I was 4th grade, 5th grade. I was optimistic. There was like this whole wide open future for me. I wasn't locked into a job, a career. I wasn't even thinking about what college I wanted to go to, or even if I wanted to go to college. I was just living, and I was just being like authentic. And that's such a characteristic of youth. And especially like pre-high school. I'm talking before you've been jaded to the sense that you're self-conscious. Because I think once you start getting self-conscious, then you start to lose your authenticity a little bit. And that might start early. That might start, high school at the end of junior high or something like that. But this was like from an era before that. And so, collecting these things, and for me, sorting through them this past weekend, man, it just like, it was kind of just this cool little moment. It was like this little private moment I had with myself where it was like old Zach looking at little Zach being like, right on, man, you were into some cool stuff. Like, and I'm like filing away, like, whatever. Oh, that's Alakazam. Like, sweet. Like, oh, cool. I got the Gengar. Or I got the, Gyarados card or whatever. And So that was pretty fun. And so anybody that maybe grew up around that same time as me, I was born in '89, but when like Pokemon cards hit and that was like your thing, definitely check out that movie. That movie was like a lot of fun. And it's one of those movies you don't go to for some like emotional turmoil at the end and being unhappy or whatever. It's like one of those ones that kind of wraps up nice. So it's pretty excellent. Anyway, so another thing that I wanted to talk about is that, and I know last podcast, right? I spoke about two things. The first thing was this sense of dread, this sense of like feeling numb to my reality. And maybe a lot of it was brought about by work or whatever. And then the second part was, I'm going to read this excerpt from Alan Watts, kind of like tie that in a little bit. Well, I don't feel numb right now. And not much has changed. And so why I want to bring that up is because I think there's like an interesting phenomena. I don't know. There's an interesting element to this. And that's that it doesn't happen in like a linear progression. It doesn't happen and just continues on in that state. Like I'm not like waking up in this sense of dread and every day is like woe unto me and all negative or anything like that. What's interesting is that feeling, that sense of anxiety, that dread, that comes in waves. And so the last podcast, you caught me on the crest of that wave, like trying to figure it out, right? And that wave came crashing down. And now I'm in the lull. And now I'm like kind of hanging out. And it's all sorts of fun, right? I go to work and it's just like, it's just like anything else. It's just, this is like what I'm doing right now. Like no big deal. Does it need to be this creative thing that I have complete autonomy and control over? It's like, no, it's just, whatever I'm doing right now, I'm being true to myself. I'm not going to sacrifice that and be like a phony person. I'm the first to stand up and act like Holden Caulfield and point everyone out, like Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye, and be like, you're being phony, right? I try to be at least true to myself with how I act and treat people and talk. But in terms of the job itself, like it hasn't bothered me or anything like that. And I just found it so interesting that there's this sense of urgency that has lulls and valleys, and then it kind of crests up in these big waves, and then this anxious moment, right? And then crashes down again, and then it kind of submerges itself, right? And it's just, and I don't know if that like those waves are just, hopefully they're not like every week, right? And you're just like good for a couple days, and then a couple days I'm not good. Hopefully, maybe that's something that emerges over the course of many years, and maybe those crests and those crashing waves are when you're going through what people will call your crisis. Like, Bob's Burgers, like, kids in crisis, Mr. Fromm. Yeah. But the thing is, we're so quick to diagnose. We need to figure out what this is, and we need to treat it immediately. And maybe some of the treatment is just kind of like, you feel this way right now. Let's monitor it. It's valid. It's real. But let's just see how you feel in like a week, in a couple weeks. Let's change some variables. Let's attempt to change some variables and fail horribly, because apparently you can't go a day without coffee, right? So I just thought it was really interesting, because when I was talking last week, that was such a real sense of urgency that I felt. And it was almost like I couldn't even like get myself out of bed. I mean, I could, right? I couldn't, like, there was just like zero motivation, like, ugh. And I don't know if you can hear that. There's some kids yelling outside, but it's interesting It's interesting because, and I don't know how to make these broad assessments, like, or I don't know if I should make these broad assessments, right? Is this a characteristic of people or is this a characteristic of me? I don't know. I don't know. And I'm going to continue to monitor it. I'm sure I'll be giving you updates. But last week I was like, let's treat this like a science experiment. I'm going to change one variable. I'm going to go a day without coffee. Like that was going to, boom, case solved, right? Well, I didn't even do that. And I feel like 100 times better. So maybe part of the recipe is time. And this wasn't even that much time. But I think it's something that's relatable though. Like, looks like someone's having a bad day. Like, right? Maybe it's a little bit of that. I don't know. But I think ultimately there is a problem or an equation to be solved or figured out. And I think that there is going to be a little bit of that needed for myself long term. But in the short term, like the very urgent moments, the moments where you're going to like, I'm making my stand and I'm going to do this and this sap's happening right now. Be smart about it. It doesn't have to happen right now. Do it when it's best for you. If you're leaving your job, do it when it's best for you. If you're going to start this risky endeavor, do it when it's best for you. If you're going to stand up for yourself, I encourage you to do that all the time, but be smart about it. Because at the end of the day, you have your back better than anybody else ever will. So there's my little bit of wisdom. So, there was another thing that I wanted to talk about, is relating to that. There's a little thought experiment that you can play. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but if I did, I don't care, because I'm going to reiterate it. There's a little thought experiment that you can play. And the question is, what would it be like for you if, imagine, right? Let's say you are not in the valley of that wave. You're riding the crest of it, and you're just like holding on, like, because this existential crisis, and you're like, I need to do something with my life immediately, right? Okay, cool. Let's play the game. Let's change everything. Let's say, what stresses you out? It's like, oh, my job stresses me out. My boss stresses me out. My partner stresses me out. Whatever it is. Let's play the game. All right, let's say you don't have that job anymore. How do you feel? Let's say you have a different job. Pick any job that you want in the world. How do you feel? Because that's going to tell you a lot about yourself. Because I started playing that thought experiment recently. And mine was about job. Because I've been on this search for autonomy and creative autonomy and freedom. This sense of ownership over the things that I do, the products of my labor, right? And this gets very, like, in a real heady space. And so, anyway, that's why I like thought experiments. So I was like, okay, well, let me play the game with myself. What if let me just imagine, like, what's the most perfect job I could have? I don't know, doing podcasting full time, and that's all I do, and I have these cool, interesting guests and come in, and maybe I would be a lot happier like that. But I changed the variables in my head, and let's just say I was working a different job. Let's say, it's an employer, it's somebody else. I'm working for somebody else. Anything, doesn't matter. You could be a chemist, you could be a carpenter, you could be a police officer. Change the variables in your head. How do you feel? As soon as you remove the stress of your job and now you have a different job, how do you feel? Does it make you feel better? Or are you still stressed the fact that you have to, like, get up and go to a different job? And so what was interesting about myself, because I was like analyzing, well, what was going on in my work history? What does my professional life look like? Is the problem that I'm having issues with my job? Or is the problem that I'm having issues with jobs? And so, like, okay, taking a look back in the records, back in those archival tomes of Zach Huva, right? Digging in the past. What did I do? Get out of college. majored in philosophy and anthropology. Interesting topics. I was around interesting people. I didn't go into teaching. I didn't go into law. I didn't go into those like intellectual type places, right? I was going to grad school for a bit afterwards in public administration, hated the program, eventually dropped out of it. But there was a time where I worked in a call center, a while actually. And this is post grad school. This is like after I left that endeavor. And I was living back in upstate New York, working in a call center, inbound call center. And they tell you got to answer like 95 calls a day or whatever it was. I don't know what the quota was. It was a lot. It was something like that. And that feeling that I had at that time was so, it was just this feeling of being trapped. And you look back on that and you're like, you were not trapped at all. But I felt like it. And every day you go in there, beep, and then you have to be like, thank you for calling, blah, blah, blah. My name is Zach. How may I help you? And then like an upset customer will be like, I'm upset about my order, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, no problem. Let me help you. And then you fix whatever it is. Some people are nice. Some people aren't. It is what it is. You're dealing with like issues. And then they hang up and then beep, blah, 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 and you have to do the spiel again and again and again and again. And I was there for 2 years. Back in my early 20s, prime of my life, right? And I reached a moment where I was cresting that wave, man, and I was just like, I'm done. And I have a good friend of mine, tattoo artist, mentioned him on the first podcast, Charlie Murphy, was like, hey, buddy, come on and move out to Pennsylvania, live with me. And I was like really into craft beer, right? That was my passion at the time. And it was all about craft beer. And I mean, shoot, that could be its own blog entry, its own little diatribe, right? About the pretentiousness of craft beer, especially at that time. But I moved there. I had brewing equipment. I was like, I'm going to be this brewer. I cared only about beer. I was like, I want to do all this beer stuff. So I move in there and I'm dirt poor. I mean, I'm talking, I didn't have a job. I had less than $1,000 and I moved to a different state. And then like, I had to get a job, right? So I get a job at a craft beer store. Cool. For $8 an hour. Not cool. I'm 24 or 25. I think it was 25. Making $8 an hour. Looking back on that, it's like, wow. Because it wasn't terribly long ago. And there was such a sense of freedom by doing that. And I started this craft beer blog called Hop Religion. And it was like every, day I worked at the place, I'd bring my laptop in. I would like write a blog post and post about beer and like interesting things about beer. And I tried to like do the blog thing. So I was like, the top 10, blah, 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 blah. And like try to be a little funny or whatever. And that was cool. And eventually I ended up working at a brewery. In a brewery, like when I left the craft beer store, I was like, make me the supervisor. And they sure. And I like suddenly was making $10 an hour. Like, ooh. I got this job at a brewery like shortly after. Maybe I was there for like 6 months or something like that. And maybe it was longer. I don't know. The brewery job was like bartending. Like I wasn't a brewer, but I was like going to bartend at this brewery that had just opened. And this was like, I'm doing it. I'm joining this brewery. I'm going to be part of this brewery. And my beard at the time was like starting to get pretty epic, right? So I was that guy. And of course I had like beer tattoos. So I have like hops on my arm and like a wolf with weeds around it, which is like, my Latin's probably horrible, but it's like humulus lupulus, or it's like which is like wolf among weeds, which is beer hops, right? So I was such a pretentious beer snob. There's definitely like a couple days where I curled my mustache, and that is it was a dark time for Zach. But the point of why I bring up this is because escaping the call center and the darkness of a windowless cubicle farm. I mean, believe me, that's palpable. That was some real stuff, escaping that. But finally, I had arrived at this craft beer place. And I was at a brewery, right? In a well-known brewery. And bartending, I'm meeting a lot of people, and I'm talking to people like super knowledgeable. And when like people would come in and like not know things about craft beer, I would like educate them on flavor profiles and differences in malt and grain bills and all that stuff, right? I suddenly realized like, oh, this like isn't what I built it up to be. And I knew the brewers, like I saw them every day and talked to them and saw what they were doing, and it wasn't like that was like really what I wanted to do anymore. And then it kind of unraveled a little bit. And the reason I bring up this little history, because right after that, like I left that brewery job because a guy got promoted and was like the new manager, but he was kind of like an asshole to everybody. And he was like, putting his thumb down and like his stamp on everything. No one really liked him. And I was just like, screw this. And I like quit. And I was like, oh, I need like money for rent and things. So, I got a job working in an Amazon fulfillment center, just like part-time during the holidays. Just like, actually, no, it was like seriously full-time because there was a lot of overtime at the time. Anyway, earned up a bunch of money and moved out to Vietnam on this kind of grand adventure, teaching English. So that happened shortly after. Anyway, my point about the brewery and about craft beer and about this thing, I had built up this thing in my head, and I'm predisposed to be like, have these escapist notions. That's why recently I wanted to sell almost everything I had and like get money together to buy a van and just figure it out. But when you play that thought experiment in your head, when you change those variables, if you say, I'm not happy where I'm at, let me envision the thing that right now is going to give me happiness. Let me truly envision it. You're going to get a better sense of if that's what you really want. Because when it was all said and done, that brewery job was a lot less glamorous than I had built it up for years. I'd always wanted to work at a brewery. Even as a bartender, that seemed like the coolest thing ever. And even like recently, I thought about the van thing. I just need to get rid of all this stuff. This stuff's weighing me down. And it is. There's a lot of stuff that I can get rid of. But think about that van experience for a moment. Think about those Pinterest photos for a moment where it's a beautiful image and this van is out in some picturesque location with lots of trees and mountains. Once that photo's taken, it just kind of like, what do you do then? Like, okay, like I'm going to shut the doors because there's like mosquitoes and this is less comfortable than I thought it would be, and there's some weird noises outside, and I don't have any money, and like we've got a quarter tank of gas, and all I'm saying, because van life could be like the freaking best, because I haven't done it, right? I don't really know. But what all I'm saying is that when you have those thought experiments about changing your variable, like the main variable, like your job, not like a coffee, right? Just really try to play them out. Not just the moment that would be this like snapshot that would show up on social media. Not that beautiful moment, but I'm talking like the moment after. The moment when you're mopping the bathrooms at the brewery. The moment where someone throws up all over the floor at the brewery. The moment where, the camera has stopped rolling, but your life hasn't. And that might help you really put things into perspective, and you might have a more comfortable maybe not comfortable, but maybe you have a more desirable situation now that just needs a few minor tweaks than you needing to upend anything. Because it's always easier to kind of reevaluate and make those changes where you are right now than to do it somewhere else. Because what that ultimately turns into is it turns into you putting everything on hold. Your entire focus turns into all of these things you need to do to get to this other place. And then when you get there, you're supposedly going to figure it all out then. I'm saying try to figure it out now. And it comes in waves, right? Those feelings. So just kind of try to recognize where you're at with it too, because I'm trying, right? What I've said before is like I'm trying to think out loud a little bit with this podcast. And if you're feeling like a similar way, or you have like a similar story, I would love to hear it too. So please send me a comment. Go to the contact page on the website, wanderandreason.com, because you can just shoot me. That actually goes to my direct email. I'm interested because I'm convinced, at least right now, that my experience is not like a unique one. I think a lot of people might identify with like that feeling. So, there is one final thing that I wanted to talk about today. And I don't want this to become like a habit with the podcast, because I don't want, I'm about to wrap things up, folks. I'm going to read you this, whatever. But I did want to read something today. And this is a famous poem by Robert Frost. And I might not even analyze this really, because a lot of people had to do that back in English class. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost. Wow. I love that, right? And maybe that's a little bit of a cliche thing to read. I acknowledge that. I'll admit that. I'll take that criticism. You know why I take that criticism? Because that's a fantastic poem. And challenge yourself. And this is why I corrected myself a few minutes ago when I was starting to say, if things are comfortable for you. Comfortable is not necessarily... Comfort doesn't equate with good. Doesn't equate necessarily with happiness. And good and happiness are problematic concepts in and of themselves. I know that. I was a philosophy major. None of us are happy. Because we will debate what happiness is, right? We'll debate what anything is. But my point is that there is a desire for adventure. There's a desire for challenge. And we envision ourselves doing these things and conquering. Like, I did it, right? And then end scene. Like it's supposed to be done. Like the film crew stops rolling. That's a wrap, And then what? Okay, you hiked that giant mountain. You did the Appalachian Trail. Congrats, dude. Now what? Well, now I'm gonna... Okay, and then don't build up this grand adventure in your head. And when it's done, allow that to be like, don't think that when it's done, that your story is somehow going to just be done and it's going to end beautifully, like a beautiful poem. But Robert Frost is saying, like, take the road less traveled by. I mean, I'm sure there's been t-shirts made of, like, I'm sure people have little hipster tattoos with, like, a compass and parts of his quotes, I get it. But there is, like, some significant wisdom in it. So, yeah, evaluate what's up. See if you're happy where you're at, whatever that is. And if you're not, make those little changes. But don't just feel that you need to do something because, oh yeah, that's what everyone does. That's what you're supposed to do. There is no supposed to do in some sort of ontological sense. Some sort of, this is the truth in and of itself. Like, that's not really what's raining down on you. You need to do what is inspiring for you. And that might not be your work. That might be some other endeavor. It might be this creative thing that you're doing. It might not be any of those things. You might enjoy doing the status quo. But for you, that is the thing. It's going to depend on the person. There's no ultimate truths or answers in and of themselves. But quite simply, I think, keep challenging yourself. And shit, man, ride those crests. Ride those crests of those waves because they come crashing down and they come lull out. All right. So this is episode 3 of the Wander and Reason podcast. I hope you have enjoyed. I am very, very excited for the next episode with my close friend, Mr. Clyde Marl, who is a fancy high-tech coder. It does have the potential to go off the rails, folks. It is a very close friend of mine I've known for a long time, but he does have an interesting story about kind of where his career has taken him, and I think you will really enjoy it, but fair warning there. Anyway, this is episode 3 of the Wander and Reason podcast. Thanks for listening.